Noir Plasma Chrome Bleed. Unlocking knowledge, inspiring innovation, empowering curious minds.
This website makes learning so easy. I found all my resources here.
Like what you share.
Welcome back, focused learners. Today's explainer is going to serve as your dynamic architectural blueprint to the incredibly dense and, let's face it, highly prestigious 2022 ICSI CS Professional Curriculum. We're going to dive into this together, but we're not just looking at a basic study guide here. Oh no, we are mapping out an advanced master plan for building an elite corporate governance practitioner. Okay, let's just jump right into this master plan. We'll be covering the CS Professional Framework, ESG and compliance architectures, mastering drafting and pleadings, corporate finance and valuation, restructuring and insolvency law, and finally, electives and key resources.
So, starting things off with Section 1, the CS Professional Framework, and our curriculum overview.
Now, the sheer weight and prestige of this curriculum really cannot be overstated. And the magic number you need to keep in mind here is 7. That's 7 total papers encompassing both core and elective subjects. See, this framework isn't just about rote memorization of statutes. It's about perfectly bridging those incredibly intricate worlds of law, finance, and corporate ethics so you can solve complex, real-world case studies. This structure really grounds us in the exact foundational layout of our blueprint. Group 1 holds papers 1 through 4. That covers ESG, drafting, compliance management in your first elective. Then Group 2 houses papers 5 through 7, where you'll tackle strategic management, corporate restructuring, and your second elective. When you look at how the mark weightages are distributed, you realize it's a meticulous, deliberate balance of governance principles and hard financial strategy. Moving right along into Section 2, ESG and compliance architectures, and the rules governing them. Together, papers 1 and 3 form a modern shield. They literally defend corporations against everything from massive regulatory breaches to climate risks. And this brings us to the double materiality principle, which brilliantly illustrates a massive paradigm shift in the corporate world. It's no longer just about making a quick profit for shareholders. Today, we have to evaluate how climate dynamics hit a firm's bottom line, and concurrently, how that firm's operations are actually impacting society and the ecosystem. If you're wondering why this matters so much right now, well, this is the exact integrated framework heavily regulated in India today by SEBI's BSR core metrics. So how do we actually institutionalize all of that without losing our minds? Enter the ISO 3731 Continuous Improvement Cycle. This is the absolute high-powered engine of modern corporate compliance, and it operates on a really fast-paced plan, do, check, act cycle. First up, the planning phase, which involves rigorous risk assessments. Second is operational execution, the do phase, where leadership actually embeds these controls. Third, the performance check, driven by continuous monitoring and internal audits. And finally, corrective action, allowing the firm to adapt rapidly to changing legal landscapes. Let's look at how this builds into concrete statutory obligations. The sweeping scope of the Section 204 mandatory secretarial audit is, honestly, kind of staggering. A practicing company secretary has a massive regulatory surface area to police here. We're talking the Companies Act, CSR, Depositories Act, FEMA, SEBI's LODR, plus a whole web of industry-specific labor and environmental laws. You are the ultimate gatekeeper, ensuring the corporate structure is completely ironclad. Which brings us to Section 3, Mastering Drafting and Pleadings, with a major focus on legal precision. This part of the curriculum demands absolute, uncompromising precision in both legal drafting and courtroom advocacy. Let's slow down for just a second to contrast two foundational principles here, because it's absolutely fascinating how courts interpret complex commercial realities. First, we have the literal rule. Basically, if the language of a document is clear, you gather intent exclusively from those unambiguous written terms, no extrinsic evidence allowed. But then, contrast that with the doctrine of repugnancy. This is wild. If an earlier clause in a contract grants a clear right, and a later clause completely negates it, that later clause is actually thrown out. It's deemed repugnant and totally void. Now, what's really interesting here is the overarching maxim guiding these rules. Ut res magis valeat quam pereat. This was famously applied in the 1959 Supreme Court landmark case, Radha Sindardutta v. Mahajahador, Rahim. The court affirmed that a contract absolutely must be construed to give it operational effect, rather than a meaning that destroys it. It just goes to show that a single misplaced or contradictory clause can literally unravel a commercial empire if you aren't paying close attention. All right, stepping out of the courtroom now, let's move to Section 4, Corporate Finance and Valuation, diving into mathematical frameworks. Now we are deep into the spreadsheets, and you need to know exactly which financial tool to pull from your belt for a given situation. We've got a few core valuation methodologies here. You have discounted cash flow, or DCF, which is perfect for operating going concern businesses that generate steady cash. Then you have the comparable companies multiple, which is great for mature industries with well-established listed peers. And then there's net asset value, your absolute go-to for investment, holding firms, or distressed liquidation scenarios. It's all about matching the right mathematical framework to the specific commercial context. And building directly on that valuation is how a company is actually funded. It's incredibly interesting to contrast these two capital structure theories. We have the Modigliani-Miller theorem arguing that in frictionless, perfect markets, a company's mix of debt and equity doesn't actually impact the firm's overall valuation. But then we have the pecking order theory, which tells us how modern executives actually behave in the real world. They prioritize internal retained earnings first, then safe debt, and they issue external equity only as a desperate last resort to avoid negative market signaling and diluting their stock. So what happens when things go wrong? Let's transition to Section 5, Restructuring and Insolvency Law, exploring the Insolvency Code. When those grand strategic decisions fail and severe financial distress sets in, the Indian legal framework handles the dismantling of enterprise value through the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. It's a strict, high-stakes statutory process called the Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process, or CIRP. Step 1 is establishing a default threshold of at least 1 crore rupees. In Step 2, the NCLT declares a moratorium, freezing all lawsuits, and an interim resolution professional steps in. Step 3 sees the Committee of Creditors assuming total commercial control. Finally, Step 4 requires a massive 66% voting approval from that committee for any resolution plan to actually be sanctioned. So the crucial point is, what happens if no plan is approved within that statutory timeline? Well, we hit the IBC Section 53 statutory waterfall. Think of this as a desperate race for a distressed company's remaining capital. CIRP costs get paid out first, then secured creditors and workmen. Employees are third. And notice who is sitting dead last at number 8, equity shareholders. In a liquidation scenario, if you're holding the equity, you are at the absolute bottom of that waterfall, basically just hoping for loose change. And that brings us to our final section in this blueprint, Section 6, Electives and Key Resources, focusing on open book mastery. Papers 4 and 7 test practical application through open book exams, letting candidates forge their own unique professional edge. You can specialize in cross-border insolvency, adopting UNC Troll model laws. You could dive deep into group insolvency and personal guarantors, or you can pivot entirely to intellectual property, mastering the TRIPS agreement, patents, and copyright frameworks. It's all about crafting your specific arsenal for the boardroom. To achieve that mastery, you need the right tools. We've laid out the ultimate study guide matrix here. This maps the exact statutory frameworks, core textbooks like Ramaya for the Companies Act or Brilliant Myers for corporate finance, and the critical analytical scanners you'll need. This is how you physically and academically master everything we've just covered in this explainer. We've covered the structural framework, the high-powered compliance engines, the absolute legal precision required in drafting, the complex financial models, and the harsh, unforgiving realities of restructuring. With this entire master plan laid out before you, the only question left is, are you ready to step into the boardroom and command the future of corporate governance?
what you shares.
This website makes learning so easy. I found all my resources here.
Noir Plasma Chrome Bleed. Unlocking knowledge, inspiring innovation, empowering curious minds.